and I don't say this to impress people, merely to make an impression on them. I'm in the top 1% of consultants that do what I do for a reason. It's because this thorough approach to looking at franchising. I'm hoping that if I put them in a franchise, Mike, it's a one and done.
This is Brandon Turner, and you are listening to the Average Joe Finances Podcast.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like and subscribe buttons. If you're listening to our podcast, go leave us a 5-star review. All of our links can be found in the video description or show notes below.
Hey, welcome back to the Average Joe Finances Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Cavagioni, and today's guest is Patrick Elsner. So Patrick, super excited to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. Hey, I want to start this off the same way I start every podcast episode, and we want to know more about you. So if you could share a little bit about yourself, can you tell us the story of who is Patrick Elsner?
Sure. I was born on June 24th. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. Well, I'm June 2nd here. So yeah.
No, I came into franchising really through a traditional role, Mike. I came out of corporate America. I was working for CBS Radio, and I got to the point where you get a little tired of the politics and the bureaucracy and trying to manage up and all those sorts of things. And I started looking for franchises and businesses to buy. And I had sold advertising to not only franchise owners, but a lot of independent business owners as well. And so ended up gravitating toward franchising, became a franchise consultant, and now here I am in my 21st year as a consultant.
Okay, so you've been doing this for 21 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so not some small amount of time, nothing to sneeze at here. Okay, I've had other franchise consultants on the show, but I don't think anybody that's been doing it as long as you, so that's awesome. So from your experience over the last 21 years, what are some of the trends that you've seen when it comes to somebody that wants to come and start a franchise, or not start a franchise, but own a franchise? What are some of the common themes that you've seen or trends that you've seen like change over the last 21 years?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest change that I've seen is there are a lot more people that want to keep their W-2 jobs in corporate America, Mike. They want to keep those W-2 jobs and they want to build a franchise on the side. We know that corporate America is not what it was in our parents' generation, where they worked for Motorola, they stayed for 30 years, they got a gold watch and a pension, and off they went. Today, as a W-2 employee, you're only as good as your last paycheck. So a lot of the people that I place in franchising keep their jobs, but they look at franchising as another arrow in their quiver, another revenue stream. And so what I do is I help them navigate through this vast landscape of franchises and make recommendations of franchises that fit their particular criteria. So I'd say the biggest trend is that gravitation toward those semi-absentee opportunities.
Okay, yeah, and I've heard this a couple times, like what the difference is between being like a full-time franchisee versus doing like a semi-absentee or full absentee, because there's even ones that you can do that you're almost completely hands-off, which is crazy. But I also think that's very awesome because in today's culture, like there's a very big side hustle culture, and to be able to start something up that's already established and built and put together to start a side hustle, that rather than starting your own, really gives you a lot of steps ahead of somebody who just starts like their own business, right?
Yeah, it's really like a business in a box. It's almost like buying furniture at IKEA and having the instruction manual. Now, hopefully you don't end up with any wobbly legs at the end, but that's really the premise behind it. And I think the reason that you see a lot more semi-absentee, semi-passive opportunities is because the franchisors have gotten really smart. They've created so many back office systems that it makes it much more easy to go in there and hire a general manager, a manager, and have them run the day to day. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not involved. You're still going to be responsible. You're the franchise owner. It's your entity, but you've got all these systems in place to certainly make it a lot more efficient.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I like the way you describe it, basically being a business in a box. It's pre-built and ready to go. Like all those back-end systems are ready. I've built a business from scratch, and figuring out how to track all of our tasks and how we were getting things done, I had to do all that from scratch. And then I look at my friend who went into a franchise and he got into this business and everything was built for him, and he just started got right to work. And I just thought that was pretty neat. And he's actually doing really well with it. So it was just something that I was always paying attention to. Now, when it comes to like what you've seen people getting into, the type of franchises that they're doing, like food service or something related to the home industry, things like that. What are some of the ones that you're seeing right now that a lot of people are gravitating towards? I've got a friend of mine that does like junk removal, and then I got another friend of mine that does insulation. So all done through franchises. But what are some of the ones that you're seeing a lot of people gravitate towards in 2023?
Yeah, the biggest influx of activity, I think, has been really in the home services space, to your point about junk removal and insulation. Certainly what happened with the pandemic, Mike, a lot of people, instead of going on that $20,000 European vacation, they said, well, let's just spruce up the yard, make the house look nicer, drop 20 grand into improving the house. And you're also seeing that now as well with interest rates going up. Those people who have those 3% mortgages are going, hey, wait a minute, I don't want to move. I don't want to go from 3 to 7% here. So again, they're spending more money on home improvement. The other thing that happens, of course, is we're a dual income society. So we're always paying other people to do services for us. So again, home services is a huge category. Another category that I see a lot in is anything in the health and wellness space. I think there's essentially two types of people, Mike. There's somebody who's going to be a couch potato. They're going to have a lazy lifestyle. That's not who these franchises are targeting. It's the baby boomers who are looking for the fountain of youth that say, okay, how do I make my life more enjoyable? Whether it's joining an Orange Theory or going in for light therapy, whatever it might be, health and wellness, home services are probably the two pillars right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And because of some of the things that you've seen popping up a lot everywhere, has to do with health and wellness or some type of home improvement, which is why I was curious about that, because a lot of the people in my circle are real estate investors. And one of the things that I've noticed for the ones that go and open up a franchise is they do something that's relatable to their real estate business, right? So I gave that example with my friend that does insulation. Now, he hasn't necessarily used it on any of his properties yet. However, as he expands and grows, it's one of those things that, like, when he starts developing properties, he's already got the insulation company down. He already knows who's coming out to do that. So it kind of becomes like this internal process that you have to feed yourself, feed your other business with your other business. So I think that's pretty neat.
We call that complementary approach. I will tell you the one thing that I notice, Mike, in the years, probably in the last 10 years, so many of the people that have expressed an interest in franchising, because I get their financial statements and I get to look through them. It's amazing how many people that I work with own real estate. So it's not only their primary residence, but they also own rental real estate, whether it's Airbnbs or long-term leases. And I've always said that real estate is the second step after your W-2. The third next step is then usually some sort of form of business ownership.
Yeah. So let's get into that a little bit. When it comes to actually picking a franchise and finding the right one for you and finding the right fit for you, how do you help people when you do consultations, like how do you help them find that right fit, right? Because somebody might come to you and say, hey, I want to do this, but that might not be the best fit for what it is they're trying to do. So how do you help them get to the right place?
Yeah, so many people will come to me and they'll say, Patrick, I really want to open up a Baskin Robbins. And I go, well, why is that? Oh, I love ice cream. And plus, who wouldn't love ice cream? And it's got to make money. And what they don't realize is on the surface, it's a common approach. And what I do is I say, wait a minute, let's set the franchises aside. Let's approach this like we're doing a real estate transaction. You wouldn't drive around aimlessly going to random open houses. It just doesn't make any sense. You'd sit down with a buyer's agent and you would say, okay, we've got 3 kids and a dog, and we'd like to have a pool, and we need at least 4 or 5 bedrooms and 3 or 4 bathrooms. And I'd like to have a 3-car garage, and my budget is $750, and we want to be near school districts. Once you establish that criteria, it makes my job very easy to go in and say, here are the franchises that fit your criteria.
Yeah. Okay. But how does somebody know what that right criteria is for them, right? If somebody's pretty hell-bent on opening that Baskin Robbins, right? How do you really get them to understand that just because you think that this is a good idea, just because you like ice cream, just because you think it's a good location and that'll work, what makes you think that's going to be the right fit for you? Because from what I understand too, like a lot of people that get into like the food service franchises are the ones that have the most trouble if they don't do all the prep work ahead of time. So if somebody is really hell-bent on something like that because they really want to get into food service, how do you walk them around to show them that based on their lifestyle and what they're trying to do, that might not be the best fit?
Yeah. What I tell them is this, Mike. I say, go ahead and investigate Baskin Robbins. Or I had a guy recently in Atlanta come to me and he said, okay, I'm interested in a UPS store. I said, great. Is UPS the only thing you're interested in? And he said, no. I said, let's do this. In addition to looking at UPS, let me offer some additional recommendations. But first, let me understand your criteria. Why do you like a UPS store? What are the characteristics that you're drawn to? Because oftentimes people may not be able to articulate this, Mike. What they think they want is a UPS store, but what they want is something that's more light retail, Monday through Friday, a brand name, an investment of X, a return of Y. Now, when you boil it down to that, they're like, oh, I see, Patrick. Now I see why you're suggesting this and this franchise in addition to me looking at UPS. Because there's literally thousands of franchises that are out there. People are only exposed as consumers to the UPS store, the Jersey Mike's, the Mobile on the Run, the ones that they come in contact as a consumer.
Yeah, so those are the ones that get stuck in the back of their head, right? Now, I like what you were describing there when you were talking about like, the different characteristics of the franchise that they're looking at. So it's what they're really looking for. You have to get down to what the actual need and want is, right? And that's going to be how much do you want to put into it, and how much of a return are you trying to get, and then what kind of business model will help you get there. How hands-on do you want to be, right? Those are the questions that got to be answered. Because somebody might say that they want to leave their W-2 and go into the franchise full time. That's a whole different conversation, right?
Totally. I just placed a guy in Philadelphia who left his full-time gig with a major software company, and it was the same thing. Now, he's a different type of franchise owner, Mike. He is doing this full-time day one. I did another placement in Phoenix, Arizona. This gentleman's keeping his job, but he wanted to build something on the side. He's looking to hire a general manager, probably going to give the general manager, say, a 5% equity stake in the business. But everybody's different. Again, some people like a 2,000 square foot contemporary home. Other people want a 3,000 square foot traditional home. Everybody's different. That's why I have people fill out a questionnaire. That's why I do about a 45-minute interview. And by the end of the interview, people are like, wow, I never realized all the things that I should be thinking. And I say, that's why I've been doing this for 20 years. And I don't say this to impress people, merely to make an impression on them. I'm in the top 1% of consultants that do what I do for a reason. It's because this thorough approach to looking at franchising. I'm hoping that if I put them in a franchise, Mike, it's a one and done. They're not going to come back and say, oh, gee, why did I do this?
Yeah. So your goal is to make sure that once they're placed, they're set, they're going to be successful, and you don't have to talk to them again to say, hey, I want to get into another franchise, unless because of their success, now they want to do something else as well. Then they'll come talk to you again. But you don't want them coming back to you saying, hey, this isn't working out. So that's great. Now,
Look, I have a selfish reason for them to be successful.
yeah.
And if they're successful, people are going to say, hey, how did you find that junk franchise? Oh, Patrick Elsner, some guy in St. Louis, helped me figure it out. What's his name? How do I get a hold of that guy? I want to go through this process that you went through and figure out the right franchise. So I'm very interested in their success. Plus, I have a very important relationship with the franchisors, Mike. The last thing I want to do, or the thing that I most want to achieve, is I want to have the people that I place in a franchise. I want to hear about, hey, that guy you placed in Phoenix, he was our rookie of the year. There's nothing more satisfying than that because it reaffirms what I do.
Yeah, it shows that you got the right match, both for the individual and the franchise itself, right? You were able to make that match made in heaven, so to say, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, things have changed a lot over the last 3 years because of the pandemic. But even like you've been doing this for 21 years, and right now, with everything that's changed, what do you see like in today's market being some of the top franchises that hold like the most promise?
Yeah, I think brands like Orange Theory Fitness, that was a brand that started back in 2008, right at the time of the Great Recession. And a lot of people like to poo-poo fitness franchises. They say, oh, this is another fad that'll never last. Well, now they've got over 1,200 locations and they're going international. So what sometimes people think is going to be a miss ends up becoming a huge hit. Now, part of this is a combination of factors. There's no question about it. The person driving the bus is going to dictate everything. I've seen McDonald's go out of business. And why is that? Oh, sure, in part, maybe the real estate was questionable, but the guy who's the operator of that franchise, Mike, has the biggest impact on whether or not they're going to be successful. And that's why I tell all the candidates that I work with, make sure you're getting into the right spot.
You know, now that you bring that up, Patrick, what are some of the qualities that you see of a successful operator?
The biggest thing is you're former military. I love anybody that's former military. Franchising is nothing more than execution, Mike. It's following that playbook. It's that IKEA instruction manual. That's all this is. It's nothing more than doing that. I remember interviewing a lady who owned a Liberty Tax franchise in South Dakota. And Liberty Tax, if you understand the tax business, you got a really short window from about January 2nd to April 15th to make really 90% of your revenue. And Liberty Tax would give them a calendar and they'd say, on this date, you do this. And it was like February 17th, you need to go to 25 businesses and drop off donuts. And I remember asking her, I said, now, Betty, did you go to the 25 businesses and dropped off donuts? She said, I did 26. I always want to do a little more than I should. That's what it's about, Mike.
Yeah, so not only going by the playbook, but going a little bit above and beyond, right? And that's how most people are successful in anything that they do, right? You put in that extra effort and you could be successful at essentially anything. But when somebody gives you a playbook and says, hey, here's what you have to do to be successful at this, and you've already got that built out for you, I think that's one of the beautiful things that I like what I'm hearing when it comes to franchising, right? Because you do have that playbook, exactly what to do, what step to take, when to take it. It's all built for you. All those back end systems, like when you hire that general manager, you have everything set up from the payroll to managing their schedule. So I think that's pretty sweet. And it makes me really think about, what am I doing here? But okay, when it comes to the folks that you've seen being the most successful with where you've placed them into the franchise that you found as being the best match, versus ones that, let's say, now over 21 years, I'm sure you've seen some folks flop or not be successful. What are some of the characteristics of the two different people that you've seen that makes or breaks how they're going to do in this business?
Yeah, look, it's still work no matter what, Mike. The one
Sure.
thing that concerns me when I'm interviewing a candidate, they say things, maybe this will make life easier. It's still going to be hard. The difference is when you're working and owning your own business, there's a difference in the way work feels. When you own something, like I've been self-employed for 20 plus years, I'm working, it's a different feeling. So that's one of the big things. The other factor that I see that is a sort of a magic aspect of this, there's definitely an element of luck. I've placed people into franchises that have failed. I placed a guy here in St. Louis in a pizza concept. He was almost at the top of the hill, getting ready to start to make money. And all of a sudden, boom, the pandemic hits. Now, who could have foreseen that would have happened? But the poor guy closed his business. There's just nothing you can do about that. I placed a guy in Houston into a restoration franchise. Hurricane Harvey hit. It was like money was flowing to his doors. You can't predict these things.
Yeah, sometimes the act of God or nature can really make or break a business no matter where you are. Yeah, things like hurricanes, fires, pandemics. You can't predict these kind of things. Yeah, that could be pretty rough, but I appreciate your being open about that with what you've seen, right? And it just goes to show that you're not just talking about the successful candidates you've had, right? You also share everything. And I think that's important for our listeners to know that not every franchise is going to be successful. It's just like the way that we look at investing, right? No matter what you do, there's always a risk involved. So the thing is, how do you mitigate some of that risk? So some of your more successful franchisees, like you had mentioned, the one with Liberty Tax, instead of doing 25 boxes of donuts, she did 26, is taking those little extra steps that help push them over the top. So it's the same thing. If you're investing, if you're looking for in a certain market for a piece of real estate, and you said, I'm going to go out and knock on 100 doors, but then I'm going to do 10 more. I'm going to do 110. So I'm going to do 10% more than what I originally planned for. Those are the folks that normally will get the deal, right? Because that extra little 10% they put into it, they found the one person that said, yes, I'll sell you my property, right? So there's a lot of effort that has to be on the back end from the actual franchisee themselves, right? And
I will tell
I
you
feel like during your interview, that's one of the things that you extract from them.
Yeah. One of the things I will tell you, and I liken this
Yeah.
to investing in the stock market. Whenever you get any sort of prospectus from your guy at Fidelity, they always say, now, remember, past performance is not indicative of future success within this investment. And I always like to tell people, with people, it's the opposite. Hey, if you've been successful at your job at Pfizer, or you were great at Wells Fargo, or you were a fantastic employee at Procter & Gamble, there's a pretty darn good chance that if you became a franchise owner, you are going to have a high likelihood of success. The linchpin of this whole thing, though, Mike, is always going to be you got to get into the right franchise. And
Right.
anybody who tells you that franchising is perfect is full of beans. It's not perfect every time. Again, you have got to get into the right concept. This is a measure twice, cut once sort of approach.
Right, as most things should be. But when you go into something, obviously, when you go into a franchise, there's a lot of financial requirements as well, right? Somebody's going to come into this and they're bringing a lot of their money, a lot of their own capital into this. You want to make sure you're doing every possible step and taking every possible step in the right direction, because most folks are bringing a significant chunk of money into this. So actually, I want to ask you about that too. Like, when it comes to that, what are some of the financial requirements when you're interviewing somebody? Like, what are some of the financial requirements that you're looking for somebody that wants to be a franchise owner?
Yeah, the number one reason businesses fail, and this is universal, franchise or independent, it's they run out of money.
Yeah.
And you see this all the time where you'll see a business has been in business, they've got their beautiful retail store, and again, they're climbing up that hill, and all of a sudden, before they could cash flow positive, boom, they run out of money and shut down. So the number one consideration is having that financial wherewithal. So we look at that. Panera Bread won't even talk to you if you have less than $7 million net worth, less than $3 million in liquidity, and you don't have 10 years of restaurant operation experience. Now, I know people that have worked in restaurants, Mike, they don't have $7 million net worth. They don't have $3 million in liquidity, but every franchisor has those certain types of requirements.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that is quite a huge financial burden for that particular franchise. But I know that there's a lot that are definitely a lot more affordable, and their requirements are a lot lighter, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that you it's easier to be successful, right? Because you could fail at anything, no matter how much money you bring into it. But having more capital can help you weather the storms that might pop up, such as a pandemic or things like that. So what are some of the things that you've seen for, like, if somebody says, okay, I want to get into a franchise, I've got about $100,000 I could put into this to start off, and I want to do something like in the financial services industry, what would that conversation start off looking like when they sat down with Patrick?
So we'd want to find out, are they going to quit their job or are they going to run something semi-absentee? We'd
Okay.
want to know, are there family members that are going to be involved? You got a stay-at-home mom now that the kids are in school. Are they going to play a role when the kids are in school? What are their skill sets? What do they like to do? Can they sell? Do they want a brick and mortar? Do they want a non-retail service? Let's talk about geography. You live in Dallas. Do you want to go all the way up to McKinney, or do you want to go more south toward Fort Worth? There are just so many factors. That's why we have them fill out the questionnaire and do this interview,
Right.
so that when I make these recommendations, I'm really focused on that criteria.
Yeah. So it's about extracting all that data and information. So I just wanted to get an idea of some of the questions that you ask. And I think that's spot on, because when it comes to what somebody's going to get into, all of that really matters. Like, it can't just be like, I want to do this. I've got the money for it, and I just want to do it. That's not the right answer. There's so many other factors. Like, I live out here in Hawaii, and to open up any type of brick and mortar spot for anything is super expensive. So even if you had the money, actually, I'm starting to see, I think they just announced like the seventh Chick-fil-A is going to finally open up out here. And we went from having 0 2 years ago to now we're about to have our seventh. But I can tell you, like, the biggest thing that those franchisees are struggling with is finding the piece of real estate that's affordable, that they can survive at least the first couple of years in the business before they can really become profitable. There's so many factors that people need to look into and need to be prepared to talk about when they sit down with Patrick here. So that's one of the things I just wanted to put out. Patrick, I would like to transition this into something that I call the final round. It's where I'm going to ask you the same 4 questions I ask everybody that comes on the show. It gives us a good idea of how you are when you're under a little bit of pressure, but I'm already confident that you're going to crush this because of just the conversation that we've had already. So if you're ready to go, we'll get this started here.
Fire away.
Okay, so Patrick, first question of the final round that I want to ask you is, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made when it comes to your finance or business life?
The biggest mistake was during the run up in, I guess that was 2000, with the financial markets. I was absolutely crushing it. I remember like checking this mutual fund every day, and it was going up and up and up and up and up. And then all of a sudden the market started to tank. And instead of just leaving it in there, because I had a long time horizon, I was only probably 25 at the time, and I pulled that money out. It was just a stupid thing to do. Again, it's not knowing the time horizon that really probably screwed that whole thing up for me.
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency there, because I feel like that's one of the biggest things people talk about when it comes to a mistake that they made in their finances is if they had something in the market and they see it coming down and they pull it out and they're like, I wish I would have left it in because a month later it was twice as high as it was before. So yeah, definitely understand that. Okay. So the next question kind of ties into the last one that I asked you. And Patrick, that is, what is something that you've learned that you wish you knew when you first started out? And actually, we could say that what is something that you've learned that you wish you knew when you first started out as a franchise consultant?
The biggest thing and the best piece of advice that I ever got, and this rings true. I have two daughters that are in college, and I've been telling them the same thing, and it's very applicable, not only in your business life, Mike, but also personally. But you are a reflection of the 5 people that you spend the most amount of time with. So I think Charles Barkley said it. He goes, if you want to hang around idiots, you're going to be an idiot. If you want to hang around smart people like Warren Buffett, that's the type of people you want to hang around with. So you're a reflection of the people you hang around with, Mike. That's the biggest factor, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And it's something that I've said quite often on this podcast as well, is that you are the average of the 5 people that you hang out with. If you hang out with 5 millionaires, you're going to be the 6th one. It's just a matter of you start to pick up on things that they do and learn, and then you start doing the things that they do. And then before you know it, you're like, oh, I'm one of you now. So it is very important, like who you surround yourself with. I fully believe that.
One of the
Okay.
things that I tell
Yeah.
franchise owners, Mike, when they join a particular franchise, I always tell them, when you go to the national conference, find the high performers in that
Yep.
franchise system. Find out what they're eating for breakfast. Find out what they're saying to customers and to prospects. So find out what they're doing best practice wise with their employees. That's the key to this whole thing. I'm great at copying high performers. So just tell me who's the high performer. I'll just do what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's already built, like the wheel's already invented, don't sit here and try to smack that square into a circle and reinvent it, right?
Exactly.
No, I love that. All right, Patrick. So the next question is, do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to someone that is just getting started today?
In business or in franchising, or what do you mean?
I would just say in business in general. So let's say they're not sure if they want to start their own business or if they want to get into a franchise. So what kind of tips or tricks would you recommend to somebody that is like on the fence right now to make that decision?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is figure out where you want to end up and then reverse engineer the process. If you can figure out, okay, in 5 years, I'm 55, in 5 years, I want to be retired. What steps do I need to get to that point? And write it out. It's amazing. Every year people say, these are my resolutions or these are my goals. And they write them down, they set them aside, they don't do anything with it. It's like working out. It's like muscles. You have to constantly go in and work that muscle. And if you do that for a period of time, it's remarkable how effective you can be. You don't have to become a slave to that original criteria. Obviously, things change as you grow. But if you can start out with at least some level of a plan, I think you got a real shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I fully believe in that too. If you write those down and then you read them every day and you constantly keep it in your head, you're going to get there. I have my vision board right next to my desk here. So it's just there. So I see it every time I sit in this office to do a podcast or anything, it's right there. So those are the things, like it's those visual cues that you give your brain that help you stay on track and stay focused. 100%.
Yep.
Okay.
Agree.
So Patrick, the final question of the final round, and this is an opinion-based question, but do you have a favorite business, investing, or real estate related book or podcast or both?
Yeah, I tell you, everybody, there's really a couple of books, if I could give you more than one. First of all, if you haven't read Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it's a must for anybody. I would say probably a third of the people that I interview, Mike, already read the book. So to me, that is at least exposing you to the differences between the rich dad and the Poor Dad. And not everybody obviously is going to do that, but at least if you read the book, you understand you have options. The other book that I recommend always is called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. It's another must for any business owner. It's not just about franchising. You can apply the same principles in Gerber's book to that as well. But I think those are probably the two books that I generally recommend the most.
Okay, yeah, definitely appreciate that. Rich Dad Poor Dad is obviously a staple. I call that book the Purple Bible. Absolutely love that book. But the E-Myth, that's great. That one's on my list to get. I have not read that yet, but the more I hear a book recommendation, the further up it goes on my list. So I think this is probably one of the next books now. I got to go check the tally, but I think this is one of the next books I'm going to read now. So absolutely awesome. Okay, that is it, Patrick, for the final round. You survived. Pat yourself on the back. Wasn't that bad, but okay. Now, I know that was the final round, right? I said those are the final 4 questions. However, I do have another question for you, and this is the most important question I'm going to ask you throughout this entire interview, because people were listening to this and they said, I really like what Patrick's talking about. I'm starting to resonate with this. I think a franchise might be a good idea for me. So for that person, for that listener that is saying that right now, they want to know where they could find more information about you. So do you have a website, social media, anything like that you could share with us where people could find more information about you and your consultations and just getting started?
Yeah, real simple website. It's franinside.com. So FRAN inside.com. And then if they want to get access to my free guide on how to conduct a franchise investigation, franinside.com/average Joe. So if they go to that /average Joe, they can download that free guide. They can also book on my calendar 15 minutes to have just a general overview conversation with me.
Awesome. Yeah. So that's great. So I will make sure those links are in the show notes. Make it easy for people to copy and paste or click away. The only thing I ask for my listeners to do is to not do it if you're driving, please. It will be there when you get to your destination. Patrick, this has been awesome. I really appreciate your perspective. Like I said, I've had other franchise consultants come on the podcast before, but it was really great to pick at your brain because you've been doing this for 21 years. And just to see what it is that the criteria that you're looking for when it comes to somebody that's going to be successful in this business. So I really appreciate that. So to close things out, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to give our listeners?
Yeah, I think everybody should always think about other ways to generate income beyond a W-2. And if you have teenagers, get them inspired, get them to understand that there are ways to make money. Don't just rely on a W-2 job. It's sad to see when people get laid off and they're caught off guard and now they don't have any other revenue coming in because they were hoping that they were going to continue to work for the man for 30 years. It just doesn't happen anymore. So think about those alternative streams of income, Mike.
Yeah, I love it. Alternative streams of income. That's the name of the game. Get as many streams as you can. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Patrick. I really appreciate it. This was been fantastic. I also want to thank all of my listeners. I want to thank you all so much for joining me and our special guest, Patrick Elsner, on the Average Joe Finances podcast. Go leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you like about today's episode with Patrick. Aloha from Hawaii and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.